Yes, assalamu alaikum everyone. So hope you're doing well. So in today's class, I'll explain to you fiscal policy. That is chapter number 22, unit number 5, AS level economics. So this video will cover the basic definition of fiscal policy, and I'll also explain to you the basic concept of like expansionary and fiscal policy and contractionary fiscal policies, and how government manipulates different tools of taxation and government expenditure to like increase aggregate demand or decrease aggregate demand and achieve multiple macroeconomic objectives through fiscal policy. So let's begin the video. Unit number 5, government intervention at macroeconomic level, and chapter number 22, the topic is fiscal policy. Since this is a little longer chapter, so I'll split it into parts. So the first part that I'm explaining you is relevant to the basics of fiscal policy, what fiscal policy is and what are its types, including like expansionary fiscal policy and contractionary fiscal policy. So first of all, if we define fiscal policy, then fiscal policy is the policy of the government, and this is also known as demand side policy because it manipulates or influences aggregate demand in the economy. So fiscal policy is the policy of government that manipulates taxation and government expenditure to influence aggregate demand in the country. Right, so these are two tools or instruments of fiscal policy. So now moving to its types, like what expansionary policy is. Expansionary fiscal policy is sometimes also known as inflationary fiscal policy. It is known as inflationary because it causes inflation, demand pull inflation in the country. And contractionary fiscal policy is also known as deflationary fiscal policy because it causes deflation or decreases price level in the country. Expansionary policy, as the name suggests, is basically aimed at increasing aggregate demand. So the main purpose is to increase aggregate demand in the country, and for increasing aggregate demand, definitely government will have to reduce taxes and increase government expenditure. So when government reduces taxes, consumers will be able to consume more because their disposable income will increase, and investors will be comfortable investing more when government charges low taxes to them. An increase in government expenditure is directly the part of aggregate demand. So aggregate demand, if we write down the magical formula of aggregate demand, that is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So in this formula, C is consumption, I is investment, G is government spending, X is export, and M is import. Okay, so since like you can see that government expenditure, G stands for government expenditure is directly the part of aggregate demand. So if aggregate government expenditure increases, then aggregate demand will also rise, because as per the math rule, if there is rise in right hand side, then left hand side also increases. Now we will move on to the graphical representation of expansionary fiscal policy. Right, since it is aggregate, it is demand side policy, so it will influence aggregate demand in the country. So we will label it appropriately. So we have real GDP on X, and we have price level on Y. So we have to write price level or average prices on Y axis. We cannot just write price, because price is the price of a single product at microeconomic level, and price level mean average prices of all the goods and services that are being sold in the market. So we have aggregate demand and aggregate supply graphs. I have made simple aggregate demand and supply graphs that are used in the shortened period of time. So equilibrium takes place at point E, where real GDP is Y and price level is P. So expansionary fiscal policy will increase aggregate demand, and it will shift aggregate demand curve to the right from AD to AD1. Equilibrium will move from E to E1, where real GDP will increase from Y to Y1, and price level will increase from P to P1. So rise in price from P to P1 is demand pull inflation, and rise in real GDP from Y to Y1 is economic growth. and since aggregate demand is increasing, so investment will be increasing, government spending will be increasing, so employment will also rise. Or in other words, we can say that unemployment will decrease. So rise in GDP is growth. So you can clearly see that expansionary fiscal policy has resulted in increase in growth. So growth increased, employment also increased. So these two objectives are achieved. But one objective, that is inflation, that could not be achieved because inflation is increasing here. So however, this policy has a negative impact, that inflation will increase. Although demand pull inflation is considered as good inflation if it is under control, however, if it increases beyond a certain limit, then definitely demand pull inflation is also a bad inflation. And then moving to the contractionary fiscal policy, we will reverse everything. It is a deflationary policy, so its aim is to decrease aggregate demand in the country, and to decrease aggregate demand we will have to increase taxes and decrease government spending. So increase in taxes will decrease purchasing power of the producers. So producers and consumers will spend less and producers will invest less. And government expenditure is decreasing, so it is directly the part of aggregate demand. Again, aggregate demand is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So if aggregate if government expenditure is decreasing, then aggregate demand will fall, and when aggregate demand falls, it will shift aggregate demand curve to the left, and as a result economic growth falls, unemployment may rise, and inflation may be controlled. So this policy controls inflation, but it causes like fall in economic growth. So we have like price level on Y. This is price level, and again draw aggregate demand curve, negatively sloped AD, and aggregate supply, that is positively sloped, and both curves meet each other at E, where real GDP is Y and price level is P. Now if there is decrease in aggregate demand due to contractionary fiscal policy, then aggregate demand curve will shift to the left from AD to AD1, equilibrium will move to E1, real GDP will fall to Y1, and price level will decrease to P1. Now you can clearly see that there is fall in price level, so inflation is controlled, but on the other hand there is decrease in like real GDP, so growth will fall. And similarly, when aggregate demand falls, investors will invest less, government will spend less, so as a result jobs will also reduce in the country. So what impacts are basically rising in this situation? So growth is falling, and employment is also falling, so unemployment will rise, but one objective is achieved, that is inflation is controlled. So this policy, contractionary fiscal policy, achieves one objective and deteriorates two objectives, because fall in growth is not good thing for the economy, fall in employment is also bad, and controlled inflation can be good for some people. However, deflation or fall in price level that is caused by decrease in aggregate demand is generally considered bad, because it deteriorates two other economic objectives of growth and employment. Okay, so this is it for the basics of fiscal policy, what fiscal policy is, and what are the expansionary and contractionary fiscal policies, and how they affect different macroeconomic objectives, and how they affect aggregate demand, growth, employment, and inflation in the country. I believe you got this idea, and if there is any issue you may write in the comment, and I'll get back to you as early as possible. So in the next video I'll be continuously like moving forward. First of all, I'll finish this chapter, because this chapter is a little longer, but I'll move to the next topic in the next video. So see you soon, inshallah. Allah Hafiz. Thank you for watching.